Hello everyone and welcome to the channel. I'm Emmanuel, I'm a Boeing 737 pilot and a member of PMDG's tech team. In today's video we are going to have a look at how to decelerate the airplane for landing and at the standard flap extension schedules on the Boeing 737 and the Airbus A320. Now, we are going to start with the Boeing 737. The entire idea about this video is to give you a tool at hand to aid with manually decelerating the airplane for the approach without overly relying on VNAV. This may become very handy when you are flying a radar vectored approach by air traffic control, or when you are, for example, radar vectoring yourself in an offline environment, or when you are uncertain about the distance expected to be flown. So, in any case, let's start with a little bit of theory that applies to both the Boeing 737 and the Airbus A320. The A320 does decelerate a little bit better than the 737, but you are going to end up with the same ballpark figures. So, starting with the 737. For every nautical mile that we cover over the ground, we are able to lose 10 knots of speed in horizontal level flight. That means that when we have to decelerate, for example, from our current speed of 250 knots back towards the flaps up speed, which is roughly 210 knots, we need to cover 40 knots up here, so we will need 4 nautical miles in a level flight in order to lose that airspeed. The other important factor to be aware of is the distance you need to lose 1,000 feet, which is 3 nautical miles. Or in other words, in 1 nautical mile you're able to lose roughly 300 feet of altitude. Combining these two ballpark figures, you can basically estimate your energy level on the approach yourself. So, let's quickly talk about when to actually start reducing your airspeed. Now, obviously, we want to fly as fast as possible for as long as possible, while at the same time enabling us to slow the airplane down to an approach speed in order to get a stabilized approach. Now, in the 737, a good time or a good distance from the airport to start slowing down from 250 knots back towards the upspeed is when you are 15 nautical miles from the airport. The same also applies to the A320 aircraft. Now, you will notice that when you are flying in VNAV, VNAV is going to try to decelerate the airplane a little bit earlier, because VNAV will aim for a constant descent approach, so it will maintain a 1 degree angle of descent while it is decelerating the plane, which means that the plane needs a little bit longer to decelerate than if you do it in level flight. The other tool that we're going to make use of on this very video is going to be the glide slope indication. Now, in real life, when we are being vectored for the approach, we don't really use VNAV too much. Instead, we look at the glide slope deviation to judge our altitude, and then we look at the remaining distance to judge the airspeed that we are supposed to have. 10 miles from the airport, and that is the reason we draw this 10-mile ring over here around the runway. We have to be 3,000 feet above the field elevation, not faster than 200 knots, and we should have at least flaps 1 extended. Now that goes for both the A320 and the Boeing 737. So, let's go ahead and forward ourselves to the arrival. I'm going to fly this standard arrival first in the Boeing 737, and thereafter I'm going to show you the same thing on the A320, and in both cases using the standard flap extension schedule. Now, let's talk about how the standard schedule is going to look like. Our aim is to intercept the glide slope 10 miles from the runway, 3,000 feet above the ground, at a 3 degree angle. Now, our airspeed at that point should be below 200 knots and the flap extended in the 1 position. Now, ideally, just about when intercepting the glide slope, we want to extend the flaps to the 5 position, so that our speed can very slowly come back to the flap 5 maneuvering speed. We are going to maintain this configuration all the way until 4 miles in visual meteorological conditions, or 5 miles in instrumental meteorological conditions, and then we're going to go gear down, flap 15, and when the speed has reduced to the flap 15 speed, we're going to extend our landing flaps of 30, or in case we plan a flap 40 landing, we will first go flap 25, and when the speed has reduced well clear of the flap 40 placard speed, we're going to extend flaps 40. Now, for the purpose of this video, we are going to do a flap 30 landing. So, I'm going to forward a little bit now and show you what this profile is going to look like when we actually start to fly the approach. We are just about turning onto the final approach of runway 32 right at Cologne 1 Airport. Now, we can see the VNAV deceleration point is just about here. We have a 10-mile ring drawn around our runway over here, so we can see how the VNAV deceleration will start at roughly 7 miles from the 10-mile ring, which is basically 17 miles out from the landing runway. Now, we don't actually have to reduce quite here yet, but you can see how the VNAV figures are rather close to the figures that I've told you as well. But keep in mind, VNAV actually wants to reach the final approach speed a little bit earlier, so that's why VNAV also wants to start decelerating a bit earlier. And now we have localizer capture, and we can see the 10-mile ring coming up. We can also see on our DME that we're now 15.6 miles out, and I'm still maintaining 250 knots. Now when we're just about 15 miles out, that is the point where I'm going to start decelerating the airplane, which is now. So let's get the speed down to the flaps up maneuvering speed, or the green up bug on the primary flight display. Takes a little bit for the engines to spool down until the plane starts decelerating, but we can see how that is now nicely coming together. The glide path should basically come alive at any moment, and when the glide path comes alive, that is a very good reminder for you to remember that you very much need to slow down the airplane now. But as we can see, we started decelerating about 5 miles from the ring. Now the ring is just about 2 miles out and we are approaching the 200 knots. Approaching the upspeed and the glide slope becomes alive. Flaps 1. And we set the speed down to the flaps 1 maneuvering speed. Our plane is once again slowing down nicely, so let's go ahead and go flaps 5. And slow the airplane down to the flaps 5 maneuvering speed. The glide slope is just about to come in, so by the time we reach the flap 5 speed, we should about have captured the glide slope. And that will allow our engines to stay pretty much in an idle or near idle position for the majority of the approach. So we have glide slope captured, just about where we reach the flap 5 speed, and keep in mind this is recorded in a wind calm condition. Now that we've got the glide slope captured, the engines can roughly remain near the idle position. You see, auto throttle overcorrected, we gained some airspeed. So, now in a flap 5 configuration, the airplane is nicely following the glide slope down towards the ground. We basically don't need a lot of thrust. You can see how auto throttle overcorrected and increased the speed here again, so that would actually not have been necessary. And like this, we can maintain minimum noise profile now on the approach. I'm flying the airplane all the way to 4 miles now, where I'm going to lower the landing gear and extend the flaps to 15. But until then, using this procedure, we are basically flying a minimum noise approach. And we are also not wasting any fuel, because we kept the plane as fast as possible for as long as possible, and only when we really approached the final descent on the ILS, we started to reduce our airspeed. Okay, approaching 40 me, gear down, flap 15. For the purpose of the tutorial, I'm going to skip over the landing checklist, but obviously you would run the landing checklist at this point as well. So, flaps 30, the engines are still in idle, and only now that we are basically stable on the final approach, the engines are going to get out of idle in order to maintain our speed close to the final approach speed. And that is pretty much how we fly the approach in a minimum drag configuration. So, I know you guys want to see my landings, but let's first hop over to the Airbus, and then I'm going to show you both landings at the same time. Before we start the approach with the Airbus, let's quickly talk about the standard flap extension and approach speed schedule on the Airbus. Basically, we can start the deceleration again 15 miles from the landing runway threshold, at 250 knots and at the platform altitude. Once again, you can use roughly the same rates as we could in the 737, which is 10 knots deceleration, need 1 nautical mile, and losing 1000 feet of altitude takes 3 nautical miles, or conversely, it takes roughly 1 nautical mile to lose 300 feet of altitude. Now, with the same ballpark figures, we can start the approach in the Airbus in a few moments. First, let's quickly talk about the standard flap extension schedule in the A320 family. We are going to intercept the glide slope using flaps 1 in the Airbus, and we are going to maintain flap 1 until we are 2000 feet above the destination airfield elevation. If you are approaching over flat terrain, you can use your radio altimeter for that. If not, have a quick look at the cruise page down here where it tells you the landing elevation of the destination airport, which in our case is 250 feet. In other words, at 2250 feet, we're going to extend flaps to the 2 position. Once the flaps are in 2 and are actually extended to the position, we can lower the landing gear, and once our speed has reduced to somewhere close to the F speed indicated on the speed tape, we can then start to extend our landing flaps. And for this particular approach, I've planned a config 3 landing, since we in the 737 also did a flap 30 instead of a full landing. So, that is the setup that we have done for this arrival in the Airbus A320. Now let's go forward and talk about how this actually looks like when we are flying it. Alright, here we are on the final approach. So we are established on the localizer, we've once again drawn the 10-mile ring around the landing runway, and we are now 16.5 miles out. The approach mode is armed, so as soon as we hit the 15 miles, I'm just going to go back to managed speed, and the Airbus is going to start slowing down all by itself. So, overall, we're going to see pretty much the same procedures in the A320 as we did in the 737. Reaching 15 miles, down to managed speed, the plane now starts reducing its airspeed, and it is worth mentioning that the Phoenix seems to lose speed a little bit faster than the real-life equivalent. So as we can see, we lost like 20 knots of speed here within 1 nautical mile, while it should be only 10. At least that is something that a couple of Airbus pilots I know do tell me about. So when you're flying this, we can see we just lost 40 knots in the course of 2 nautical miles, versus it should have taken roughly 4 nautical miles to actually lose that airspeed. But as you can see, maintaining 250 knots until 15 DME works quite well in the Phoenix as well, and as soon as we're about to intercept the glide slope, once we start getting the flaps out, the drag model is actually going to be quite spot on. So watch as the glide slope comes in and as we're about to extend our flaps. So hitting 10 miles, once again, we do want to have flaps 1 out in the Airbus. So let's go flaps 1. And in the Airbus especially, we want to make sure that our speed is below the 200 knots by the time we intercept the glide slope. So we have glide slope capture now, and our speed is just around 190 knots, which is the slat extension speed up here. And now we're going to maintain this speed all the way until we are 2,000 feet above the destination field elevation. Now, those 2,000 feet equal approximately 6 nautical miles, as the point where we're going to start to slow the Airbus down. And remember, especially as you're approaching over hilly terrain, like we are right here, we can see there are a couple hills everywhere around approaching Cologne, the radio altimeter might not be the best source, so we are going to use the landing field elevation of 250 and add the 2000 to that. So at 2250 on the primary altimeter, we are going to start our flap extension, which is now, so let's go to flap 2. And as soon as the flaps are completely out, in the aft position over here, we're going to take the landing gear down. You will notice that only once the gear is actually fully down, the drag starts to come in, and the Airbus is going to start slowing down. Now, you could select flaps 3 and then consequently flaps full if you opt for flap full landing at any point once you're below the flap placard limit, but it is good practice if you are well above the landing gate to let the speed slowly come back and only then go to the landing flap setting, like now. Okay, and with that, our Airbus is prepared for the landing. So, I promised you we'd have a look at that 737 landing a little bit earlier on, so why not actually make a landing competition and see which one I can land better. So, let's switch right over to the 737 once again, and after that, I see you back in the Airbus.
Plus 100.
Back.
Minimums.
Continue.
$50, $40, $30, $20, $10.
Okay, manual braking, we're gonna vacate that runway right over here. So, that's how we fly the approach in the Boeing. Now, let's have a look at the Airbus landing and see if that is going to be any smoother or any harder than the landing in the 737. So, welcome back in the A320. Let's go ahead and take it in for a landing.
100 above.
Checked.
Minimum.
Continue.
100. 50, 40, 30, 20. Retard. 5.
Okay, spoilers, reverse green, decel. So, that's actually going to be a hard one to judge. I'm going to leave that one up to you guys. For sure in the Airbus, I did not catch the exit like I did in the 737. That doesn't matter, we're just going to take the next one. So, now it's up to you. First of all, to tell me which of the two landings you found better. I surely know which one I would pick, but before I'm going to tell you, I want you guys to write down in the comments what you think which of the two landings actually was better. So, thank you very much for watching. I hope that you've learned something about when to start slowing down for the approach and which flap settings to use. And I'm very much looking forward to see you guys showing it in action. In my time as a VATSIM controller, I used to see people slowing down for the approach so often and being at such incredibly slow speeds, like only 130, 140 knots, like 20 miles from the landing runway. That is something you should definitely avoid. But for now, we're gonna keep it at this. Thank you very much for watching, and I'm looking forward to see you all again on the next one. If you want to support the channel, you can do so through the Buy Me a Coffee link in the video description below, or by becoming a channel member, which is going to give you exclusive early access to new videos. But for now, thank you very much for watching, and here's the reason why I actually found my Boeing landing quite a bit better. And the reason for that is, in the Phoenix Airbus, when you start pulling the nose up for the flare, the nose down input, the Airbus gradually adds at 30 feet in real life, is applied a little bit too fast, so I'm always afraid of losing the capability to flare the airplane at all. And that's why in the Airbus, in the Phoenix, I do a little pre-flare at 50 feet, only to break that rate of descent to give me a bit more time to flare the plane when the nose down input kicks in. And for that very reason, the landing was a rather long landing, even though it was a very smooth one. But it was a rather long landing, which even led to missing the exit, and for that reason, my 737 landing was quite a bit better than the A320 landing we've just seen. So that's going to be it. Thank you very much for watching, and I'm looking forward to see you all again very soon.